like Greg says, what am I doing? Where am I at? How am I? Am I ready to react? So that's all I have to say.
Perfect. So that speaks to the level of complacency that we all can have as we drive. We're used to driving, many of us, since we've been driving more than probably since yesterday, and even used to driving in poor weather conditions. But we may be so comfortable in driving in those conditions that we stop or we don't stop and think about what are we really doing? Meaning you're on the road with other people. And that's you're on the road with other people, and other people are completely unpredictable. So we need to make sure that we're doing the best we can, looking out for ourselves as well as our fellow drivers. So thank you. Any other thoughts? Okay. Seeing none, is there a motion to adopt our agenda for today?
So done.
Second.
All right, I also would vote yes for it, so it is approved. And our first item is our financial audit report. Mr. McCray.
Thank you very much. It's my pleasure to introduce to you Wendy Unger. Wendy is a partner with Baker Tilly, our audit firm, and essentially oversees all the auditors that do conduct our audit on both a general audit cycle as well as a single audit focused on federal funding. And then if we were to require any other audit services, such as a membership audit. Included in your packet, in addition to the financial statements relative to the district, you'll make note that there is a charter school audit affiliated with Rock University High School. That's a relatively new requirement, essentially based upon the federal funding that the state of Wisconsin receives for the charter school program. So why only RUHS at this point in time? It really has to do with the renewal cycle relative to our charter schools. So as we continue to renew contracts with our charter schools, right, we'll continue to see most likely additional audit requirements. So really the focus of today's presentation, right, because essentially the RUHS is really a subset, I would argue, of our overall audit, and that will really be the focus of Wendy's presentation today is the overall audit for the School District of Janesville.
All right. Well, thank you for having me here today. Hopefully you have in your packet of information the presentation that is up on the screen. I also believe you have a hard copy of that. This document really accomplishes a couple different purposes, really summarizes the other two documents that you received, one being the audited financial statements and one being the reporting and insights document. The presentation includes information from both of those documents at a relatively high level. Again, as I go through, please feel free to ask any questions. I'm happy to attempt to address those as we go along. Where am I pointing? There?
The down button.
I am. That one?
I'll do it for you.
All right, that's perfect. So the agenda, again, going to go through some audit results, go through a relatively high-level summary financial information of the results from FY21. I've included a couple additional bullet points of additional information that I think is important for the committee to be aware of. And again, we'll conclude with any additional questions that the committee or management may have. On the next slide, this is the audit results. So the objective of the audit was to render an opinion on the financial statements for the district as of June 30th, 21. Included in your audited statements is a clean, unmodified opinion. That is the highest level of assurance that you can obtain from us as your auditors, and that's the type of opinion you're hoping to receive. That unmodified opinion means that the financial information contained within the audited statements is believed to be materially accurate, that all disclosures that are required to be included under the standards are included within your footnotes, that generally accepted accounting principles had been adhered to, which we are required to follow, and that accounting principles have been consistently applied year to year. What that means is that there were no new governmental accounting standards or GASBs effective for the district for FY21. There will be a new one for FY22, which will potentially have a significant impact. That is GASB 87. and that is the accounting for leases. So the district will be required to accumulate all lease information and then determine the appropriate recording under the new standards. Switching to the next page, continuing with some additional audit results. Before we get to the financial information, just going to go through the reporting and insights document very quickly. This is a document we use to communicate various communications that we need to have with you as the committee. Included in this document is comments and recommendations that might come up as part of the audit process, control type issues that are noted. Included in here is a material weakness regarding the internal control over financial reporting. That finding is in there due to the fact that we as the auditors prepare your audited financial statements as part of the audit process. For a brief time, we become part of your control structure. And due to that, that is referred to as a material weakness. I would expect that to probably go away in the upcoming year with the addition of Matt. He more than has the skill set to at least be able to review those in great detail. So would expect that to go away. Also very happy to say that there were no material audit adjustments noted as part of the audit process, and in our world that is relatively unheard of. So congratulations to the finance team for accomplishing that. Also included in this document is two-way communication regarding your audit. Those are the very last pages of the document, really soliciting input for the FY22 audit, so I encourage you to take a look at that. Included under the communication section of the report, which is some additional informational type points. One is related to the stock. This is a continuing comment. The district owns or has roughly $11,000 of stock that is sitting in its scholarship fund under state statute. The district is not allowed to own stock, so we would recommend that that be evaluated and appropriately dealt with during FY22 if possible. Also included in that section is journal entry, review, and support. This point, although included in the letter, has already been addressed in February of 2021, but due to the fact that a portion of the year did not have the appropriate level of reviews due to staffing changes, that point was included, but again, that has already been rectified during the current year. The required communication section, those are the items that we need to communicate with you, talks about accounting principles, has a table of the estimates that are included within the district statements. Again, had we had any disagreements or problems working with management, we would have had to include that. But again, that section of the report is very normal and customary and nothing I need to draw your attention to. Moving on then, the compliance audit of the federal and state programs. Within your audited financial statement document, towards the very back of that document, is the compliance work that was done regarding the federal and state programs of the district. The district expends roughly $16.4 million of federal money and $79 million of state money. And because you expend the amount of federal money that you do, you are required to have an audit performed in accordance with the uniform guidance. So this used to be a single audit or an A133 audit. Those were the terms used numerous years ago. Very happy to say that the programs that we tested during FY21, we looked at child nutrition, we looked at Medicaid, and we also looked at the COVID-19, the stabilization fund sources. Very happy to say there were no federal compliance findings noted, so the district did an excellent job adhering to the requirements of those programs. Likewise, because we live in Wisconsin, we're also required to do a state single audit. So on an annual basis, we will always look at your general aids or your equalization aids. We also, for 2021, looked at the special education program through the state and also your SAGE program. And like the federal programs, I'm very happy to say there were no compliance findings noted on any of those programs either. So a very positive result from a single audit standpoint. On the next page, this is where I begin some very high-level financial information. This is the general fund that is presented on this page. You'll note that I've included the final budget column compared to the actual column. Your revenues, $121 million compared to $119 million budget. So you were under in your revenue categories by $1.2 million. One of the things that contributes to this shortfall per se is that, as Dan mentioned at the beginning, Rock University High School is part of your budget process, but it comes out of the general fund for reporting purposes. So roughly $400,000 of that is related to the movement of the appropriation to Rock University. The remaining portion, or most of it, is related to federal funding. Your title programs, Title I, Title II, and Title IV, all received less than you had anticipated during the budget process. So federal revenue was roughly $760,000 under budget. Your expenditures, $121 million of expenditure budget, $119 million of actual. You came in under budget for your expenditures by $1.8 million. Most of that savings was within your instructional category and also within your instructional support services category. So overall, when you put together your final budget after amendments, you had budgeted to add roughly $84,000 to fund balance. You actually, for 2021 or FY21, added $710,000 and ended the year at $24.2 million of fund balance in your general fund. As I noted on this slide, there's two pieces to that. There's a non-spendable portion, which is $762,000. This represents items that have already been paid for, but you haven't expensed them yet. So a good example is prepaids. You prepay, for example, insurance in June for July. Doesn't get expensed till July, but the cash is gone, so those monies are earmarked as non-spendable. The remaining portion, $23.4 million, is unassigned. Those are monies that you have available for spending. That balance does fall within the district's policy of between 17 and 23% of your general fund and special education expenditures. So again, a very positive year for your general fund. The next slide, the remaining funds of the district, your special education fund, roughly $20 million of revenue. Keep in mind that a good portion of that comes in from your general fund. $11.4 million of that revenue is money that comes from the general fund. The remaining portion, most of it, is your federal and state revenues. That fund had equal expenditures and had zero fund balance, and that's all it is allowed to have under DPI requirements. The next column is your debt service fund, $13.4 million of revenue. Most of that is taxes. There is roughly $1 million of premium. You did a borrowing during FY21. The premium on that borrowing went into your debt service fund to help make interest payments. You paid $12.7 million of principal and interest on long-term debt, added $720,000 to fund balance, and had $2.1 million of fund balance in your debt service fund as of the end of the year. Those monies are all restricted, can only be used for debt service purposes until the debt of the district is paid in full. The next column is your food service fund, $5.4 million of revenue. Most of that is federal revenue that you received through the child nutrition program. 5.2, almost 5.3 million of expenses. You added 178,000 to fund balance and had 1.7 million of fund balance in your food service program as of the end of the year. The next column is your capital improvement fund, $3.5 million of revenue. That's money that was transferred in. Almost all of that came in from your general fund. Those are monies that are being set aside for future capital improvement needs. That fund had almost 9.8 million as of the end of the year. And then the capital projects fund, 22.5 million. Again, this is where your borrowing went. So most of that is the borrowing that was done. Spent a little bit, 371,000, and had 22.1 million as of the end of the year. Again, all of that unspent borrowed money and restricted for the purpose for which it was borrowed. The last column there is your non-major funds. There's a schedule in your audited statements on page 51 that details this out, but this is your trust fund, trust fund meaning your gift fund, your community service fund, and then again, Rock University High School is also included in there. Those funds in total utilized 67,000 of fund balance, had 647 as of the end of the year. All of them saw a decrease in fund balance except for the community service program, your Fund 80, which saw an increase of 48,000. On the next page, which is the last page of information that I've included, just a couple other items going to quickly touch on. The district has the ability to borrow 10% of its equalized value. That calculates out to $504 million. As of the end of June 30th, 2021, you had outstanding roughly 58.4 million. So the difference between those figures is your capacity to borrow, which is roughly 446 million, again, as of that snapshot in time. Other post-employment benefit obligations, there's an extensive footnote that's included within your statements that details out the actuarial information that's provided to us as part of the audit process. As of the end of the year, the outstanding liability net of the amount that you have set aside in trust is roughly 25 million. You have 5 million that's in trust, so your total liability without any of the set aside is 30 million. Again, that's all based on actuarial information that is provided to us. The defined benefit pension plan obligation, again, a relatively extensive footnote. That's your stipend plan. So a little bit of liability that's left there, $190,000 as of the end of the year, again, also based on actuarial information. And then the remaining item that I have included here is the employee retirement system. This is the district's participation in WRS. And under GASB 68, we are required to record on your books the district's proportionate share of that plan as of a snapshot in time, which is as of 12/31, not as of June 30th. We're always got a time lag based on when that information is provided. As of June 30th of 21, that amount is an asset, 27.3 million. And that figure fluctuates between an asset and a liability based on what market is doing in the funding of the program. So when the program's overfunded, you get an asset. When it's underfunded, you get a liability, but it's always very close to 100% funded. On the last page of the presentation, I have included my direct line, my email address. I've gone through this very quickly and at a very high level. I'm happy to talk with any of you in more detail regarding anything included or the audit process, but I'm also happy to answer any questions you may have now.
And I appreciate what you did. It's a nice synopsis. And I realize that's what it is, and we're gonna have to look further if we want more. But the thing that kind of bothers me a little bit, we do fundraising in the district, and that goes into stock, I believe is the way it happens, isn't it? We turn that into stock and we utilize it as necessary.
I don't believe so.
Okay, what is the stock we're not supposed to have?
I think that was given to you as a gift. And so when the donor gave it to you, it just never was turned around and sold.
Okay,
And you really just need to convert that from stock to cash or a CD or whatever you might feel is the appropriate investment vehicle.
do we pay capital gains or subtract?
You don't
No,
pay any.
it just
taxes.
is what it is.
It is
And the
what it is.
value will be at the end, whether it's 120,000 or 80,000.
Correct.
Okay, that's what kind of bothered me a little bit
Yeah.
as such. Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Nothing against you folks, you do a good job, appreciate it.
So just real quick, if I may. So you may recall, as a committee, right, and as a board, right, there was a resolution passed to essentially secure, if you will, the stocks, because we don't really have the stocks. We're on record of owning the stocks, right? So they're not in the safe. They're not a paper certificate, right? So we had to get essentially a resolution by the board to submit to the issuing company, right, the ability to kind of hold those stocks to then sell those stocks, right? And quite frankly, right, it's been a bit of a pistol to deal with, right? So this is why we've been dealing with it pre-Dan, mid-Dan, hopefully not post-Dan, right? So you know, we'll kind of continue our diligence, right? But we really need, takes two to tango. And so that's really been our challenge, right? So you've addressed this as a board, right? We need to continue to follow up administratively. That, as I just shared, has been a bit of a pistol, so.
And the fortunate or unfortunate point is that it's not a material number. If it was a material number, we would request you to move that process along. But again, the $11,000 that it equates to is not material from that standpoint. So you have some time to, rectify it.
And this too, right, if it's not in policy, it's certainly something that I've apostolized over time, is we do not accept stock, right? So cash or check is really what we would prefer.
Theoretically, we could, but it'd be handed over to someone to hold it for us. Is that correct? If I walked in and donated $10,000 worth of GM stock and that, what would happen to it? Would it be rejected? Or should I have to cash it in and then donate it?
Right. So then we get into, I would say, kind of that donor relationship, right? Is we're not equipped, so we don't have a brokerage account.
Right.
Right. So then how do we manage the stock? Right. And so ideally, I think if you were interested, if that's a promise, Commissioner Damenhausen, to show up with $10,000 of General Motors stock, we will certainly work with you. Our preference would be is to work through your broker. Right. And again, it gets into the donor relations aspect. Right. And we are very grateful of your consideration. It's just we're not equipped to handle stock.
Talk to my estate. Thank you.
I was gonna say thanks, Carl, but I don't think we want to talk to your estate yet.
You never tell, can we?
Thanks, Wendy. Couple questions. And having been on the board, and we've had, I would say, many, trying to think of the best word, lack of internal controls over the years. And I know we've cleaned up many of those things. But I didn't quite understand the financial reporting, and with Matt having the capability of taking care of them is wonderful, but could you explain it just a little bit more?
Sure. Well, first of all, to touch on your internal controls, all of your internal control issues that may have existed in the past have been rectified except for this financial statement prep. So the financial prep comment really surrounds, again, the fact that we prepare that big audited financial statements. We make sure that all the disclosures that are required under the standards are included in there. They're appropriate. They contain the information they need to. Prior to Matt's arrival, I don't know that the district had somebody that completely understood all the GASBs and the information that needed to be included in there. After our working with Matt through this last audit process, he exhibited great skill and asked really good questions, and it showed us, as your audit firm, that he understood the information he was looking at. So that then we now can switch to doing it as a convenience versus as a necessity. So that is why that material weakness I would expect to go away.
Thank you. And my last question is, given everything in the audit, what would be our biggest weakness other than that?
In your audit, what would be the money? I wouldn't say, I don't know that I would say that there was a weakness. I think one of the things I would look at is continue to focus on your general fund and building that fund balance. Again, your policy is that 17 to 23%. You're on the low end of that. If that's a range that you're looking to have, that would be one area I might consider. Again, you're appropriately putting away money for future capital projects. Your debt capacity is minimal. So overall, I wouldn't have any other recommendation off the top of my head.
Okay. Well, thank you very much. I know that a lot of effort has gone in to clean up a lot of those internal control issues over the years. So it is nice to see that we're down to one and we have a relief coming in to take care of that. So
Yep, that is great. There's not many clients that I work with that does not have some type of material weakness. And if that's eliminated, you have none.
sure. Okay. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Excuse me. I don't know. Do you do other school districts too?
Yes, I do other school districts in the state of Wisconsin. I go from very large, I do Milwaukee Public Schools is my client, to very small K-8.
Well, you made a statement, and not to put it down, I think, because we all like that, build your fund balance.
Mm-hmm.
But to build our fund balance, we take penalties. How do we build our fund balance without taking a penalty? That's state law through
Yeah,
Act 10.
yep, your limits, yep.
Yes, Wendy.
Well, Dan, don't you have this all figured out?
So slowly, right? So that's the issue, right?
Right.
And so what we did, right? So unless you reviewed our prior, videotapes, oh my gosh, like I just, or you listen to our meetings on cassette, I might as well continue to date myself, right? So, right, so that's always the issue, right? So somewhere someone determined 17 to 23%, right? And so ideally, if we're putting funds into 46, we're paying our OPEB 73, Post-Employment Benefits Trust, right? So this year we contributed, right? So I think what Commissioner Damenhauser is referring to, and kind of what we talked about, right, is we can't let millions go if we have millions because of the state aid hits, right?
Right.
So as much as we can expense, which that, we're kind of in this, to then Commissioner Ardrey's point, right, is slowly, right? So
Baby steps.
baby steps.
Appreciate it. Nothing.
Nope.
But I thought maybe you knew something we did.
I have no silver bullets, but based on the question, that was one thought.
Well, we're inside of our range this year as opposed to outside, so we've progressed. Okay, thanks again.
You're welcome.
So Commissioner Ardrey, just one more point, is I was remiss earlier, right? So the audit is truly a team approach, right? And so that's everyone within the business services group, from Kathy to Mary to Tammy, particularly on the federal grant side of things, right? And let's just pause at federal grants. So it's not just Tammy, it's the program managers that work with Tammy, right? It's the occupational therapists and the PTs who are appropriately filling out the Medicaid logs, right? So it's really somewhat of a team approach, right? It's comprehensive. It's just not the business services audit, albeit if it sucks, right? I'm out on the street. So, so the buck does kind of stop there, right? And again, Mary and Julie, right? Sherry, our friends in payroll, right? From a payroll perspective, Jamie Brown in benefits, because we're working closely between our two offices, right? And so we're preparing data for the key benefit survey, right? Which is, a table, if you will, as part of the audit from the OPEB liability standpoint, right? So again, a shout out to them. It's not just Dan, it's not just business services. It's really our folks throughout the district.
Well, thanks, Dan, for your leadership in that area. Although what I heard is we really just need Matt.
How long's our agreement?
All right, moving on smartly here. Next, 1.5, presentation of the fiscal 2021 year-to-date financials. Mr. McCray.
So again, I continue to appreciate the patience of the committee. This is not, we do want to get to that point of providing more of a data visualization in addition to the document that you have in front of you. Prior to the meeting, I was chatting with Wendy and Matt. Our financials in terms of revenues and expenditures are very important, but they're not necessarily very exciting just because of the nature and flow, if you will. So kind of what you have is through November. I shouldn't say kind of what you have. What you do have is through November, right? So what you'll see in December is really the beginning of the applications of additional state aid. And then what you'll see obviously coming January and February in the future will be our tax settlements. So this is kind of why we pay attention to November, right? In particular, our cash position. And as we always allude to, we are expending faster than we are receiving revenue. So keep in mind, we receive quarterly equalization aid. There's actually a bit of a lag, but essentially quarterly, right? And then our property taxes, which account for nearly 40% of our budget, really are coming in January and February. So we get really tight in November, right? Which is why we solicited a line of credit again for a few days. Costs about $1,200, $1,500, I believe, for our line of credit, right? Which then we go back to the fund balance issue. Keep in mind, even with fund balance, all right, again, it's not entirely comprised of cash, and our June 30th fund balance is not our fund balance come November, right? So this is additional pressure, we'll say, on individuals such as Tammy, is how are we filing our claims? all right, not only in terms of title claims and IDEA claims, right? We're incurring expenses. We have to incur the expense. We file a claim with the DPI. The DPI then reimburses us for that expense. Also keep in mind with the additional federal funds related to ESSER, right, is again, we're doling out, if you will, more cash where the whether it's a private school related to gear in ESSER 1, whether it's our own commitments to ESSER, right? So a lot of times we're expending, and then we're receiving that reimbursement. So cash position is very key. I think the takeaway is to understand where we at from a revenue and expense standpoint come November, right? December, we get more fluid because of the state equalization payment, right? Then again, January, February, we start to receive our tax settlements. Keep in mind, when we receive those tax settlements, we have debt obligations, right? So we have a fiscal year, but we levy debt on the calendar year for our March and our September obligations, right? And so I believe statutorily, although I can't quote the number, right, providing our debt service first, right, to our bond obligators, right, is a first priority. Operationally, it's second, or operations are second, I should say. That's kind of where we're at. We will, and you will see a little bit kind of related to financials, because again, this is kind of a high level composition of everything. Again, Matt Sylvester Knudsen is developing a really cool tool for our operating managers to use on almost a daily basis to see their expenditures to date and where those expenditures are falling, because we really need our budget managers to have the tools to manage their budgets well, right? And to manage and to spend, right, per our authority to spend as a district throughout the year, right? So conceptually, if we're 50% of the way through the year, ideally, we would want to be expending 50% of our budget, right? Because what we spend is essentially in support, of what we do as a district. So, and we want to spend early, spend often, but spend within budget, right? So, and spend appropriately. Maybe I should add that fourth point there, spend appropriately.
Questions? How much of our line of credit did we end up using?
I think it was 1.5.
So sometimes what happens, right? And so when we say, well, geez, where's 1.5? Okay, so what happens, okay, this is a board decision that can essentially affects our cash, right? So now either way we get to that point, but what's a big drawdown in November for us, particularly on November 25th payroll, right? We're accumulating, right? Because the board makes a determination in the fall, essentially what the final adjustments are, right? So we have a ton of retro pay, right? And so we work with Scott and his group, right, in terms of when do we want that pay to fall. Right now, do we want it to, ideally, we want it to fall within a tax year, right? And we want it to fall as quickly as possible after that board determination, which typically is the 25th, right? So you have all of that aggregate accrued payroll, or the payroll that is due, also going out. Now, one could say that trickles out throughout the year. Either way, we get to that destination. But, that's why sometimes we look at that large dollar amount, right, is to ensure that we're covering that. 1 million. That's it.
Thanks, Matt.
And it's about 20 days, right, until we get that equalization payment, right, which is usually like the 10th or thereabouts in December, right? It's just we need a little bit of time.
So, I'm just thinking about if that is our biggest expenditure, and at what point in time that we as a board know that that's what we're doing, then we wouldn't necessarily have to wait until we've taken formal action if that's the action we're going to take. So if we're going to give a 10% wage increase, I picked a crazy number because I know it's not going to happen.
Wait.
So if we're going to, it's not going to happen. But if we knew that, then rather than having a big bump, we could just start as soon as we, and I guess in practical sense, have made the decision.
Sure. I mean, there's different strategies and tactics, right? There's different strategies and tactics.
I mean, just something for us to ponder as we, well, to ponder.
Mhm.
I'll just, okay, any other questions? Okay, seeing none. One. Well, that gets you in trouble at times, and that could get me in trouble. Well, so I guess my thought is if we consider that soon enough, and when we're issuing contracts, and then people have an idea of what they're going to make, what they're really going to make, then we already know what the fiscal note is associated with that. So it's just when do we start to pay that, or is it all retro or whatever? But all right, next item, update on capital maintenance projects and referendum approved work.
Yeah, so Dave Leader is unable to join us this afternoon, so I'm going to pinch hit for him relatively quickly. Dave was kind enough to prepare some notes. Capital maintenance projects. So let's talk a little bit about Parker and a anticipated tuck pointing project take place in June of this year. There'll also be some LMC carpeting replacement at Washington over spring break. There'll be a small roof replacement scheduled sometime when the snow and frost is out at Roosevelt. And then there will be some odds and ends per day carpeting throughout the district, right? And most often spring break is a great ample time to take care of that, if not early June. Unsecure pathways, phase 1 buildings are nearly complete. So this is a great discussion as to what does nearly complete. Occupancy for the most part has taken place. If occupancy has not taken place, it's really, I think, relative to the operational flow of that particular building office, right? So we continue to be haunted, right? I'm sure everyone here reads the paper, watches 60 Minutes, about supply chain issues. So door hardware, doors, glass, right, and as well as office furniture have had significant delays. And so that's why it's hard for us to say everything is 100% complete on phase 1. It's certainly in the very high 90s. There are also some additional projects that kind of, if you will, are points of discovery. So if you think of Lincoln and you think of its sister school, Jefferson, relative to the addition of a window, just to provide a little bit of a better viewing for individuals who approach the door. Now, that is not part of the original work package. It's supplemental. It's a change order, right? But we'll most likely see that the summer of 22 for that work to be complete because it's fairly invasive, particularly to the occupant in that office, right? So we'll be working through some of that. Phase 2 buildings, just as a reminder to everyone, are Madison, Monroe, Jackson, Parker, which is pretty much door hardware, and Wilson. So demolition has begun at those buildings, and particularly the triplets of Madison, Monroe, and Jackson. Wilson's going to be fairly invasive, and again, Parker is, if you will, kind of door hardware, so not so much. And then phase 3 of the building project. So what we've done kind of through our process is in phase 2 and phase 3 is during our one-on-one meetings between the architect, the owner, which is essentially Dave or myself, as well as the building principal and the contractor, is we're having principals sign off on the floor plans, have principals sign off on the finished plan, right? So that way we have verification, right? So essentially everyone understands at the end of the meeting, all right, the scope, the intent, and if you will, kind of the work. So phase 3 buildings and design are wrapping up and soon to go out to bid. And those are Marshall, Franklin, Edison, Craig, Kennedy, Rock River Charter School, and Roosevelt. The ESC, right, we want to anticipate some work here, but our focus truly has been on the academic buildings. And phase 3 bids will be released on February 7th, and I believe due back on the 28th, right? So we'll have a bid opening as we always have. So Dave and I have attended those. I know Commissioner Ardrey has attended as well. They're at Cullen, right? It's a little bit like draft day. In terms of bids coming in, right? We're evaluating whether it's mechanical, electrical, plumbing, work related to demo, what have you. So that's an interesting process. And then boiler replacements, again, also part of our referendum. So those, we have a target date. I think we got some initial bids. I think we kind of went out just to kind of double check to be sure everyone understands the scope of work. And Dave has on here February 3rd as a date. Ideally, as soon as we are out of our heating cycle, we'll begin that work at those 6 schools, which are written on my board in my office, and I've not committed to memory, even after all this time.
I'll ask a question I've asked before. As we go along, our referendum and our working money capital and that has taken care of a lot of issues that we identified in the last 10 years that we needed to do. And thanks to our referendum and probably some good grants and things, we'll be able to accomplish a lot. But with everything we have scheduled, what I'd like to see somewhere along the line is what's left.
Sure.
And I'd like to, subtracting all this, what do we have left to do to get it right?
Yep.
And and we all know in our buildings, there's both with energy conservation and things that are needed, but we also know there's things for air handling and a variety of things for safety reasons.
Right.
So that's something I'd like to see in a report when the time is available. I don't want it off forever, but I don't want to crush you with more work at the moment.
No. So you raised a very interesting point, and before Tammy moves on to her presentation, if I may, is, as you know, so the voters supported a $22.5 million debt issuance really related to secure pathways, which is about $15.5 million, right? We have about another up to $4 million in boiler work. So as best as we can do on our secure pathway, if we're under budget in that 15.5, we can shift towards more boiler work, right? And again, as you know, we have essentially 19 buildings, right? We won't throw the Chestnut House in there quite yet, but essentially, 12 elementaries, 3 mids, 2 high schools, right? Rock River Charter School, the ESC, Chestnut House, and of course we lease space with Rock University High School at Blackhawk Tech, and appreciate that partnership. All right, so I think focusing, as we have on security, right? Because preceding that, you may recall, I'm sure you recall, is UNESCO, now SiteLogic, conducted a very comprehensive mechanical, electrical, and plumbing analysis. All right, and so that identified well over $110 million worth of MEP work, in addition to some building tuck points and things such as that, right? So that is still on the docket, to your point, right? And so then how do we begin to address that very large volume of work? Right, so we've been good, right, as Wendy Unger from our audit firm pointed out, in terms of investing in our Fund 46. All right, so we really need to, how are we going to harness those available dollars prudently and efficiently, right, as well as they're still not going to meet over $100 million worth of identified need. And so then what is that long-range plan, if you will, which may be segmented, right, to address that? Because our buildings aren't getting younger, right? Nor am I, right? So we need some attention.
Yeah, I just want to keep it in our mind.
Thank you.
You still have this to go. That's you. I think for the rest of the board, and if new board members come on over the years, I think they have to be aware there's things that still have to be done, and I think it's important that we're always aware of that. So, Dan, I appreciate the work that you do to help and kind of follow this through. But somewhere it would be prudent to update that long-range plan that we
Agreed.
developed years ago, and now say we've got this done, we've got some extra money, we can address the higher priority, whatever that may be, educational services center, Chestnut House, whatever, and then go from there. And just take a hard look, and I'd like to see that whenever we can, and sooner rather than later.
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
Thanks, Carl.
Thank you. You're welcome,
I
sir.
didn't even pay you to say that. 'Cause that's what I've been saying to
I'm
it.
sorry.
And also, no, that was perfect. Good to have another voice saying the same thing.
Commissioner Ardrey, we do need to go back to agenda item 1.5 and have a motion to move those financial summaries to the board.
Do we have a motion to move the financial summaries to the board?
1.5?
Yep.
So move. Second.
We're all in agreement to do that. Thank you. Never remember that at all. Okay, our next item, SR3 update.
Excellent.
Dan, Tammy, oh, just Tammy.
Something to say before I jump in there.
I would like to introduce Tammy Carlson as our fiscal analyst grants manager. Tammy has shifted roles, right? So, and she's still our grants manager. Matt has taken on some additional responsibilities relative to Fund 27 accounting on the interim, right? Simply to do the work that Tammy is about to share with you today, right? So really kind of being the tip of the spear for us as a district and pulling things together, whether that's work Tina Johnson has done on the benefit side in terms of our safe return to school plan, work that nursing staff under Kim Paraboom's leadership has performed. It's really pulling all this together to meet our grant requirements. Tammy.
So Denise said I can bring this with me as I maneuver. So as you can see on the screen here, we have developed from our school district homepage a link to an SR3 an SR federal funding page. There we go. In the interest of being transparent with our community and making sure that we have all of the information, that the SR3 grant actually requires us to have this information out here. So what we have done is we have identified the three different major components of the three different acts that we received funding for the pandemic, coronavirus, emergency financial assistance. We link from this homepage to so anyone can come here and we can link to actually, if you could scroll up there, Denise. If you see under the links area, we have our SDJ COVID-19 dashboard. That is where we have the metrics of the COVID cases in the community along with our mask metric. So that is an area that people who are interested in the funding can look and see where we're at with that. We also have a safe return to in-person instruction and continuity of services plan. That is a document required by federal law to be utilized for the SR3 funding. And as we click on that link, we are currently in a feedback status for that document, and we are asking for feedback from the public through the end of this month, and then we will make any changes necessary based on any feedback if necessary, and then we will post that to the DPI. The Department of Public Instruction will review it, make sure that it follows all of the state and federal guidelines for the SR3 plan. And then if it is allowable, then we'll be able to move on and actually finalize our SR3 plan and budget. So this is the first step in the process, is to get this safe return to in-person instruction and continuity of services plan. And basically this document, because we've been working we've had students in school since the fall semester of 2020. So we already have a lot of these pieces in place. This is just a document that kind of brings it all together. So going back to the homepage there, we just have the outlines of the different grants. It identifies how much is going to the public budget, how much is, if we have private school equitable services, how much of the grant funding was required to be supportive of the private schools. As we've explained before, the SR1 has been completely expended on the public side, even though The funds were available through September of 2022. We have actually expended all of the public budget. We are still working with the private schools on expending their private expenditure, and the goal is to have that by the end of this fiscal year, so we don't have to cross into another fiscal year. But it is possible that we may end up crossing in for July, August, and September into the next fiscal year, because that is allowable. The focus, we identified, just this brief overview, the focus areas of the funding. These are areas that are identified at the state level on our SR plan at the state level. And then this SR1 public expenditures just kind of outlines how we used each of those. And this is what we had presented at the last meeting as well. So it's just now showing it to the public in a form that we hope is a little easier for them to access. And then we have the Governor's Emergency Relief Fund. That was also part of the first batch of money that came through. Once again, we have the public amount that was given to us, the private amount, and then the grant timeline again is September 30th, or September of 2022. And we've expended those public funds, and we are still working on the private funds, and those funds were all used for staff costs. So then scrolling up, we are currently in the process of utilizing the SR2 funds. That is 7.4 million. We have currently spent 1.3 million of that. So we are in this current fiscal year still using some of those funds, and then those will go into next fiscal year as well. That we have until September of 2023. And again, we had to identify focus areas that we were required to use those funds for through the federal grant program in the state. It's called the WISE Grants system. What we are doing right now is the planning for the SR3. That's our $16 million. It's available through September of 2024. We have a very brief SR3 plan timeline here, but in your packet, we actually included a more detailed SR3 application timeline for you that kind of goes over each of the different steps of the process. So we're just doing an update to you right now. We had a survey that went out. That was the last day of the survey was Sunday, which is why the packet information was not part of your board packet that was given to you, but there is a handout that has a draft right now of the plan results, and I'll be going over a couple of key highlights of that in a minute here. We have the information from that survey will be used along with information from stakeholder engagement meetings that we've had, different members of the administrative team. We have a template that they're using to get feedback so that it's kind of in a uniform process to be able to look at. I'll be meeting individually with Kim in the Student Services Department, Kim Perenboom, and Allison DeGraff in Learning and Innovation, along with Chris Benwald in our Learning and Innovation Department to go over individual sections of the survey that apply to their individual areas and stakeholder feedback to identify areas that we feel would work with the current district programs. We want to make sure that we are supplementing our current district programs and also not creating something that we cannot sustain after the funding is gone. So those are the two kind of key components that we're looking at. We also want to make sure that we have data points set for whatever funding we're going to be doing to make sure that we can respond if it is not working, whatever we've decided to do, that we can pivot and use the funding for something that is working. So we are looking to make sure that we have data sets along the line to make sure that we are putting our money to something that is actually going to be working for our students and our staff. So after coordinating with them, we're going to draft up a SR3 plan. That's gonna get to Denise here for the board packet by February 17th. And it will be presented to your board at your February 22nd board meeting. The initial SR3 plan is required to be submitted to the Department of Public Instruction by March 11th. And it can be updated. So as we find if something's not working, we can adjust those funds for something else. 20% of that funding is required to be used for addressing learning loss, and it needs to be evidence-based improvement strategies. So we can't just put money towards something that we think will work. There are set identified evidence-based improvement strategies that have been identified by the federal government or the state government that we can utilize. So those are some things that, as I'm meeting with the two different departments, to really address and make sure that we're following an evidence-based improvement strategy. Just an example, the process that we follow to adopt curriculum here in our district, that is an evidence-based improvement strategy. So we already have many evidence-based improvement strategies within the district. These are just ways that we can utilize to expand upon what we're already doing. So once we actually post the safe return to in-person instruction and continuity of services plan, which we're planning to post by the end of this month, it is required by the law. Every 6 months, we have to review that plan and make any adjustments. We have to make sure that we have that plan available for feedback, which we do on our website here. We have a dedicated email address for people to provide feedback. So every 6 months, we will be reviewing that. And that's through July of 2024 will be the last month. So just a quick, with your SR survey results, we had 1,006 surveys returned. There was a small issue with the demographic information. So the first 208 surveys were not able to be identified by the demographic area. But the remainder you can see on your draft document of how the types of people that filled out the survey. And then there were identified stakeholder groups that the grant had identified as groups of students. Oh, are people missing it? You have it? Okay, excellent. There are identified groups of students who the state and federal government have identified as subgroups of students who may have been disproportionately affected by the pandemic. And so they wanted to make sure that we are getting feedback from people who represent those groups of students so that we can make sure that we're addressing the needs of those subgroups. So we had identified 4 sections areas that funding may be needed. And we identified within those sections of conversations, specific general areas within those subsections that funding may be used for. So under addressing learning loss, you can see that after school tutoring, extended summer school, weekend tutoring, new instructional materials or curriculum, career and technical education, updated facilities or equipment, and professional development for our staff. So each of the sections, you can see that we identified those areas. So as you can see, for addressing learning loss, after school tutoring was the most prevalent. People could say as many in a section as they wished. So it wasn't like they could only select one. As many as you thought would be beneficial, people filling out the survey could check them, as many as they felt were important. And then close behind that is instructional materials and curriculum. And down below, it'll identify the actual specific number of people who said that area was important. So after school tutoring had 471. The weekend tutoring was not as popular. So this is why we're doing this, because if we put a lot of effort and money into putting into a weekend tutoring program and nobody wanted to use it, that would be not a good idea. So, and then the educational technology needs, those are pretty evenly distributed. Additional security for our district technology and resources to assist with the technology help desk training and inventory. And then in our student services and supports, again, social emotional support and mental health supports are real key. As you can see, even looking across the board at all of the areas, those were the key areas that most people had identified that they felt were very, very important. Over 700 and almost 800 in the mental health supports. We do have a mental health grant that we are already working with companies, local companies, and we are working with Kim and Sandra Robinson to identify additional ways that we can provide additional mental health supports, hopefully with some of the funding through our SR3 plan. And then facilities and operations, air quality facility upgrades. We are working with our program partners, Cullen, and I apologize, I'm forgetting the other, EUA, to identify an air quality survey that we'll be getting information on to be able to help us build that portion of the plan. And then once again, the custodial and sanitizing supplies. On the back page, we asked people to identify with each of the areas, identify which areas were most important to them. And this, they were not, so you had to you could only identify one group for each level. So if you had it as a first priority, you couldn't identify 3 as first priority. So the big lines on this document, we figured first and second choice kind of encompass. And so down below it identifies, so 495 people ranked addressing learning loss as their first or second priority. And then second was student services supports of 427. So we did have an other category, and there were 339 responses that identified other. 228 people ranked those as their first or second priority. We are still analyzing the data for all of those detailed pieces to be able to, that's why this is in draft form, because that is still being processed because it just closed on Monday. So with that being said, we have the timeline, we're working on the process, and we'll be bringing that forward to the full board at that board meeting in February. So do you have any questions for me? Dan?
So oftentimes we say we are committing ESSER dollars towards instruction, right? And I think when we say instruction, right, we believe teachers and other support staff in the classroom. I think the challenge is, well, that appears to be a rather large bucket. And so can you just tell a little bit about the detail and the thought process that leads to the detail related to WISE grants and essentially how that detail is housed within WISE grants, reviewed by the DPI, approved, and then we move on from there.
Sure. So are you asking how do we identify which staff we're putting toward the grant? Is that your question?
That, and when we say, you know, we spend 1.1 million using a number for staff, like what does that mean? So oftentimes a board member may raise the question such as, well, what kind of staff?
Oh,
You know,
sure.
Yep. How did we meet that determination? Like,
Yep.
where are we applying that staff?
Yep. So for the SR2 program for SR1, we utilized funding to be able to keep, we lost students in the special ed program. With the pandemic, there were a large number of students that ended up doing schooling elsewhere. So we lost a large number of students in special education. Because of that loss of students, we normally would have lost special ed staff consistent with the number of students. But because of the pandemic and because of the staff that we had in our district, we were not sure if those students would be coming back. So what we did was we took a portion of that funding to be able to maintain our current special education staff, which meant that we had smaller teacher pupil ratios for special ed during those years. But now we're seeing that our special ed numbers are coming back. So it was actually a good move. We used the ESSER funding as opposed to local funding to be able to cover that. It also helped with our special ed maintenance of effort because we're required to maintain a per pupil amount from year to year. Well, and you create a base. So because we had lost so many students, if we had kept those people in our local budget, our per pupil base would have increased largely because of the $1 million that we kept there. For SR2, we identified some curricular areas. So we identified in the elementary level, we wanted to keep our elementary class sizes smaller. So as we got to like the where we would have had to add, where we would have had another teacher, we added that in the past when they hit 25 students in a classroom or 26, we may not have added a teacher if it was in the middle of the year. We used the ESSER money to be able to continue to add faculty at the elementary level with ESSER money to maintain smaller class sizes at the elementary level this 2021 school year. We also did teachers, their response to intervention teachers at the high school level in reading and mathematics. We maintained pathways, so as students move along on their educational pathways, say they're in a tech ed program that has like your initial class, and then you go up through your senior year to a higher level class that you would be able to take. Because we lost students, many of those classes we may have had to drop those classes because not enough students were involved. So we were able to maintain we call them pathways, maintain those educational pathways at the high school level to be able to continue to keep those students. We also utilized some staff funding to be able to support our HR department, who was doing contract tracing and working with our staff. At the beginning, we had a significant number of staff go to our students go to the Rise Virtual Academy. So we had to have staff to support the Rise Virtual Academy students. And because of the increase in virtual learning, we were able to use some of the ESSER money to offset some of those extra costs as we moved staff, but then also had to add staff. We also had some extra costs in regards to scheduling. Because kids were moving around so much that summer, we needed additional staff to be able to help with scheduling of where students were at and what their schedules were going to be at whatever location they were at. And then I think Dan wanted me to point out how that works at the state level. So any position that's a licensed position, we have to budget per individual person. So if we have 10 extra AVA staff members, I have to put them in the system with their salary and benefits cost by individual person. So we can't just say we have $500,000 that are going to AVA staff. I have to identify each person, how much their salary is, how much their benefit package is, and then we kind of balance it out. So if somebody went on a maternity leave and didn't end up getting paid their full, then I have to kind of balance it out at the end of the year. And because these grants cross fiscal years, that was something that I learned the first year because these are the only grants that we've ever had that have crossed fiscal years like this. So I've now learned that as I'm building a budget, I put the fiscal year in the description so that it can easily sort by fiscal year to see, because our Skyward system, when we're building a budget in the Skyward system, it's just for that fiscal year. But the grant dollar amounts are for the full portion of the program. So we have to be able to match the Skyward system with what's in WISE grants, because WISE grants is the full budget and Skyward is just the budget year that you're working in. Okay.
I will say one.
Oh, yes, Carl?
You answered the questions I was gonna ask,
Oh, good.
because the virus or the situation of the times for the past year and a half, almost two, have really raised our cost of employees, I guess, for lack of a better term, and that. And this helped pay for this as such. You have been diverted from some areas that you normally be working on, and we have to still fill those areas, and we still have to pay you, which is only fair. I would want to be paid. And the funds seem to have been able to fill in these gaps of funding that we were diverting and that. So thank you very much. I was gonna ask that question, and then here it all comes up very nicely. So thank you
Well,
very
and-
much for anticipating.
And as you pointed, I just want to make it clear that these funds will end. So we are looking
Right.
at making sure that whatever we're doing are not things that are going to obligate us past the grant funding period. As you'll see when the survey results actually get posted to the website with all of the responses, some of the other responses were wanting an increase in CPI to match CPI for all staff. Well, if we do that, that's obligating past the grant period because you can't go back and say, oh, well, we're going to take that all back in 3 years from now. So I just want to make sure that that's clear. And I thought we had outlined it in the survey well, but I don't think maybe it came across. So I just want to reiterate that
Yeah.
we are looking at programs and services that and things to purchase that will not obligate us for the future
Yeah, and
after the funding is gone.
Yeah, and it will eventually, we hope, migrate back to what's quote normal, whatever that may be in the future. So we just have to be cautious as we go along.
Correct.
And I think you're doing the job in
Yep.
that. So I appreciate that very much. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you. Yes, Greg.
I always have a question or
Of
two.
course.
SR3 plan.
Yes.
And listening to what you said, there is 20% that we have to designate toward addressing learning loss.
Yep. Through evidence-based improvement strategies.
Well, obviously, that's what it has to be anyway. But, so I rounded up and just said, well, that's 3.4 million of
Yep.
the 16.6. So do we have targeted sort of dollar amounts for each of the categories identified?
No.
Or do we loosely have that?
No, that's
Do-
what we're working on at this point. Our goal right now is to work with Kim and Allison, so our student services and our learning and innovation. We're going to identify the needs in those areas first and foremost, because those are the pieces that directly affect the students in our district. And then once we have dollar amounts for the actual plans that we would be putting in place for those particular things, then we would be looking at further costs in other areas such as facilities improvements, technology, security upgrade type things. We'll be gathering all of that data together and then making those decisions as to what should be slotted into whatever funding we have.
Okay, so in theory, we could spend the whole dollar piece all on
Correct.
academic learning loss.
It's unlikely,
Just-
highly unlikely, but yes, theoretically, that is our goal is to really address those needs first and foremost for our staff and students in the classroom with those evidence-based improvement strategies first and foremost, and then looking at what we have past that. Now, that being said, from working with all of the grants that I've worked with and the requirements for that, it's very unlikely that we would go anywhere close to the full 16 million.
So as we look at the categories in which we've identified survey-wise and then the results which kind of follow, will that be the priority for the expenditures most likely?
We'll be utilizing both the survey, because you're required, the SR3 requires you to use stakeholder feedback to develop your plan. So yes, we will be using the survey feedback plan along with our stakeholder engagement meetings that we're using to identify those key core areas that we'll be focusing on initially and then add to from there.
Any other questions? Thank you very much. Okay, next. 1.8, 2022-23 budget development update. Mr. McCray.
Your presentation needs to be pulled up.
So as he gets ready, one of the things, and first of all, for the board members here, as we think about the whole budget development process, once a budget gets passed, we start the development process right away. And I think one of the things we want to make sure that we're looking at in particular, at least my viewpoint this year, as much preloading as we can do. I kind of shared my thoughts even when it came to, the big fiscal note toward the end of November. Well, as much as we can start thinking early and early and earlier, because whether we like it or not, the actual year starts July 1st. So all the decisions that we're prepared to make with whatever we know, the money it starts July 1st. So as much as we can preload, the better off we are. Thank you.
Okay, well, we're right into the 5 promises, so thank you very much for that, right? So I think it's important to identify the fact that we're going to talk a lot about numbers, right? And it really gets into, hopefully the budget supports the mission, right? And the mission, if you will, is focused on student success, relationships, our culture and climate, finance, and certainly safety, right? So again, it's not just about the FTEs and memberships and dollars and cents and debt and everything else, right? It's all in support of what it is we are as an organization. Mouse note. Do I need a keyboard? Okay, so there are a number of variables related to school finance. We're not going to go over all these variables. We're really going to focus on membership because it's membership that drives revenue. Okay, a couple of today's topics real quick is, remember, we're in year 2 of the state's biennial budget, right? And we have a budget process. And part of our budget process is not just really the cycle itself. It's just not the document that we produce that contains all the dollars and all the allocations and the objects and the functions. It's really also trying to understand the difference between recurring and non-recurring, because that really focuses, if you will, in terms of what it costs to run the district over time, right? And so we really need to think into the future and not just in the moment. And we also, right, and again, a shout out to Mary Cobb and to Matt and to others within the business services group, really is we're really looking to refine our chart of accounts, our general ledger, right, so that it's very user-oriented to not only, we'll say, a building principal or a teacher, but it really provides us understanding to make effective decision-making, right? And so part of that is what's a building level versus a district expense, right? And so what we don't want is we don't want dollars coming out of the superintendent's office to fund the building level expenditure, right? Certainly we can do a budget transfer, right? But essentially we need to be able to provide the services that are needed in a building versus going and looking for money and perhaps unspent buckets of money. All right, membership update, we'll talk a little bit about that. The projected revenues and expenses, that's what everyone is here for, right? And then considerations. So what is on the horizon? So administratively, what are we talking about as we prepare a budget for the board's consideration? Okay, year 2 biannual budget. Okay, I was going to do a pop quiz, right? But I thought I'd give you the answers, right? So $0 in revenue limit authority, 0. All right, now we're a declining membership district. Even if it went up to $250, it wouldn't make that much of a difference. But the big number here is 0. Okay, per pupil categorical aid increase. Year 2 of the biannual budget, 0. So far, we're seeing no new revenue growth. Oh, thankfully, the voters approved a $4 million operating referendum. You go, that's awesome. We have an additional $4 million to spend. Okay, so we're going to take you through that. We're going to take a look at last year's revenue limit worksheet in terms of our base revenue. We're going to take a look at this year's base revenue. And there's a difference. And you notice it's a smaller amount. Someone's going to say, well, why is that a smaller revenue limit amount? And it really talks about, or references, if you will, membership. Membership is what drives. And we are a declining membership district. All right, and so what's the difference? Well, it's $1,560 in less revenue limit authority that we have as a district. So then you go, well, you got 4 million. You go, yeah, we got 4 million, thankfully. All right, but we're going to deduct 1.56 of that. So actually new revenue that we will have is 2.4 million, not 4. All right, because this is a non-recurring referendum. If we were to pass a recurring referendum, which is a huge curve, it's a whole nother discussion, right? Our base revenue would stabilize. That's not what we have. And the majority of districts that pass, an operating referendum, love the mask, right? It's just hard sometimes, right? That we pass, all right, is we're very thankful for that. A little bit about the budget cycle, right? So January, here we are. Shared some of this information with directors last week. Finance is getting the first kick at the can, right? And this is a little bit about our forecast, right? We haven't developed our assumptions. I think the administrative team, Superintendent Pufall and I want to talk a little bit about that, a little bit more before we present the budget assumptions to the board for their consideration. Again, our budget assumptions, right, are kind of the guardrails as we go through the budget development process. All right, second Friday count, right? That's huge for us. Where are we at? That helps in terms of our building level allocations for the next year's budget. February, right, we'll have determined that, right? February again, we're going to really roll out a new tool. It's a tool I used in Clinton. Matt and I have talked about it extensively, and that's really Skyward's online budgeting tool, right? So we're getting away with ticker tape, right? We're getting away with Excel documents and calculators and all that stuff, and we're using Skyward's online budgeting tool, right? And that really eliminates a lot of data entry. And then March, right? I said budgets are due. All right, I was almost lynched at the directors meeting in terms of February. All right, it is the end of February. Maybe it's the first week of April, but it's fairly close because we're really not that far away from the beginning of the July 1st date that Commissioner Ardrey spoke of, right? So particularly our building level budgets, right? Typically a building level budget at the elementary, right, is about $32,000, non-title funds. All right, and we're really talking about general funds. It does take a little bit more time for Tammy to work with our building principals related to title and IDEA, right, because there are carryover considerations, but essentially in Fund 10, all right, it's about $32,000, right? It's just a little over twice that when we look at our middle schools, right, and it's really about 4 times that, about $120,000 for our secondaries, right? So these are not huge dollar amounts. Typically, all right, we do not balance the budget, all right, if we needed to, at the building level related to the themes, Post-it notes, markers, diplomas, all the odds and ends that it takes to run a building. Okay, membership. This is where it gets exciting, right? So essentially, going a little too fast here. Can we go back? Not go back? Doesn't matter. School funding is really driven by members. Everyone here on the committee should know it. You're seasoned board members. This is where we were in September 21, 9,045 members, right? So remember, and members are different than enrollment. Well, we're seeing our enrollment decline as well, all right? But membership, again, is what drives our revenue limit authority. And this is just it in graphical form. All right, so if we go back to 2013, right, we had 10,351 students in our buildings for a membership of just over 10,021. Where are we today? 9,481, all right, with a membership of 9,045. It's a significant decrease. In the past, people would say, well, close a building, right? You got 1,000 less kids, all right? But the reality is across 20 buildings and across all the grade levels, right, how are we doing that? Well, you really can't. All right, now we have, though, over time, because every time we go through, right, during my tenure here, there's the spring staffing report, and you'll see reductions, right? You'll see a tightening of the belt over time, all right, but we still need to meet the needs of our students in the classroom, all right? It just doesn't necessarily translate into close a building, all right? It's a little more deeper than that. Open enrollment is still good for us. That's awesome. Right, so just to kind of bottom line it, this year at a point in time, right, so remember when we do the third Friday count, it's a point in time, all right, and at that point in time, we are 183 positive. All right, open enrollment is very different than when it first began. All right, so someone could show up at our doorstep today, someone could have showed up in October, and this number changes. Just like someone could, who was attending our district, could leave to return to their home district, move out of state, whatever the case may be. So similar to the June 30th audit that Ms. Unger presented, it's a snapshot in time. So too is this data that I'm sharing with you. This is our third Friday count data. Revenue limit. Kind of a little bit, and I've shared this slide before, right? If you look at Clinton, and this is, if you will, line 6, line 7 of the revenue limit worksheet. So this is before any exemptions, such as a referendum, energy, voucher, what have you, right? The base revenue per member for Clinton is $12,142. We're at $10,000. So for every member, Clinton's getting $2,142 more per member, right? And we use this data as we were preparing to go to referendum, right? So this does not include the $4 million, right? And if we did, we'd just be about 11,000, so we'd still be short, and we wouldn't reach the top. All right, also keep in mind Clinton passed the recurring referendum. All right, I'll stop with my plug there. All right, and we are at a non-recurring referendum. So their base has been able to build over time. Okay, we're not going to go over this in detail, right? But this is the revenue limit worksheet. And what you'll see and what's in your packet, if you say, well, I don't like the PowerPoint slides, you can go to the DPI, pull off the same final, if you will. Well, let's see, if it's this year, it's not quite final, but it was updated, I believe, on January 5th, revenue limit worksheet. And area C is where you'll see our declining membership illustrated based on counts. All right, so that's why the September count is extremely important. And everyone knows that, but perhaps someone on the viewing audience is not here. Then we get to F. That's our $10,000 revenue limit authority, base revenue, right? So I think 2 years ago it was $9,700. We were actually below. Then we were raised to $9,700 because we were a low revenue limit threshold district. So back in 1993, when revenue limits were implemented, we were a low spending district at that point in time. And we were locked in and then subject to allowable revenue limit increases since 1993. We're at 10,000. And that's most likely due, or is due to recent legislation, right? Meaning in the last biannual budget. And then G is a list, if you will, and this illustrates, this is actually last year's revenue limit worksheet, $3.5 million in revenue limit authority. This is a snapshot of what next year's revenue limit, this is a draft, but essentially where we'll be at. And you'll see the difference if you were to go back and forth. You'll see that difference between that $93 and $92 million base revenue limit. And again, I projected essentially as of this point in time what last September's third Friday count was. It's conservative. Should we go down, right? And oftentimes when I'm up here, right, I anticipate people going, well, Dan, you did a forecast prior to the referendum, prior to August 2020. Did you not forecast a drop in membership? To which I say, we did, right? We were dropping about 130 members every year. So we forecasted in 130. It's August of 20. We haven't taken, right, our September 3rd Friday count essentially in the first few months of a pandemic, right? And so we kind of got slayed, if you will, in terms of membership related to that. And we're not alone, right? But we forecasted, we anticipated, that's the question we took to voters based upon a decreasing membership. It just decreased more than we anticipated, and I'll blame the pandemic for that. Right, and so what you see is the 21 actual and what we're looking to be in terms of the 2022 projected, trying to keep essentially our membership the same. But again, the membership that drives our revenue limit is a 3-year rolling, which is we're starting to see those higher numbers roll off over time as each year passes. So we're getting lower and lower. So thankfully we have an operating referendum. Talking a little bit more about membership. This is line 6, line 7, that 3-year rolling average where we're at. If you go back to 2013, our revenue limit authority was 94 million. 0.1, we're at 93.8. Right. Things are calculated on a 3-year rolling average. So if you really want to be linear, you're going to say, well, the math doesn't work out. Trust me, the math works out. Okay. Fewer members, 3-year rolling average, fewer, little, or less revenue. Okay, that's the good news, right? We still have air in the room. We're okay. Do we need to open up a door? All right, so cast forward, right? So Matt did some projections, right? In terms of, okay, we're going to pull out ESSER as a federal fund because that's one-time money. It's not going to be recurring. We're going to understanding our recurring costs versus our non-recurring costs, right? We're not setting ourselves up for a fiscal cliff. I don't have a vote. I'm not one of 9, but we should not set ourselves up for a fiscal cliff. All right, we anticipate our revenue to be $128 million after we back out, and it includes the operating referendum, and then our expenses. Now that assumes a 4.7% wage increase. That is CPI. Okay, that will be essentially, these are the things administratively and the board will have to work out. All right, the difference between essentially our 2.5, which we've normally budgeted, all right, and a 4.7 is about 1.7 million additional. All right, it assumes a 10% health. Again, Tina and her team, right, our broker, Cunningham and Butler, going to work it out. 10% increase in health for us is $1 million. Get to 5, it's half of that. Get to less, it's even more. If it goes up, all right, then the deficit increases. All right, it's the importance of health insurance. All right, it's a benefit. We want to be an attractive attractive employer, right? We want to attract and retain talent, all right? But let's go back to the beginning of the slides. 0 in revenue limit authority, 0 in per student categorical aid. Thankfully, we have an operating referendum, and we're still struggling because of membership. That's our economic reality. So the Finance Committee gets to see that. We have 2 other committees, all right? So this is why we want to spread the gospel, so to speak, right? We cannot be making financial decisions without understanding the financial implications. All right? Anticipated loss, assuming that's what we do, is $3.4 million. All right, now Superintendent Pufall will raise his hand and say, Dan, we always have money left at the end of the year. All right? Yeah, we do. We just had the audit report. All right, we need to get better. Right? And I'm not saying it's like there, because we have to budget for the number of paras we anticipate to serve our students. And if we have high turnover, that's less dollars. We need to do a better job in terms of our capital maintenance, because what's funding Fund 46 is unspent funds, right? Because we have a timing issue. All right, now that the 5-year period has eclipsed, right, there may be some different strategies we'll be able to employ. All right, so it's open positions. We didn't travel a lot last year. Therefore, we didn't have a lot of student transportation costs, right? So these are all things that began to feed that, right? We did some good work, right, in terms of our special ed transfer, using ESSER funds because we have fewer students, because we have to play the long game, not just the short, immediate, live for the now game, right? So that's kind of what we're anticipating. Now, can we begin to tighten up? And this gets back to better reporting for our principals, understanding our chart of accounts, our ledger better, and frankly, sometimes asking some difficult questions. We've always budgeted for X, but we ran at 30% capacity. Is there a trend line for that? Is there a pre-pandemic trend line? Right, so again, it's myself, it's Tammy, it's others within Business Services Group, Matt, how are we analyzing the data, right, which is the shift that you'll see within the BSG, or are we just paying the bills? Right? So it's our role to serve the teaching and learning that goes on in the classroom, because that's what we're here for, right? And as part of that, again, there may be some difficult questions we'll have to answer and ask. So it's on the horizon. 80% of what we do is people, right? So we're not Scott Forge, where 80% of what we need to maintain is manufacturing equipment to manufacture a product. We're people. We're in the people business. Everyone knows that. It's 80% of our costs. All right. Health and dental insurance is on the horizon. Is it a 10%? Can C&B negotiate better, maybe 6% NTE? Let's hope so. Right. Let's provide some stability That's what we've done. It's nice to know more than 1 year what your anticipated health insurance increases are going to be. Not that dental's not important, grand scheme of things though, compared to health, it's important, but let's work on dental as well. Compensation's on the horizon, okay? So we have PPE talking about parapay. Great, all right? Does PPE understand, if you will, the budgetary implications? Okay, how do we meet the demands of providing stability for our students related to paras as well as teachers, right? It's not good that if there's a special ed child that they're seeing 8 different paras a day, or there's inconsistency, right? So how do we provide stability to that? All right, student services, athletic director, great, $85,000 what was presented. It's not gonna cost $85,000, it's gonna cost more. So 85 is in, but the additional is more. It's not added to the 3.7. All right, substitute teachers, right? So we can't occupy, if we were to fill 100% of our sub rate, and we don't, we'd need $1.4 million. We budget $1 million. We're running at 70% on average, right? So if we go above that $1 million, it's gonna cost more. So when we look at increasing the rates for our subs, we're okay because we're still within that $1 million based upon our fill rate. Okay, higher the fill rate, we're gonna eclipse $1 million. We'll never get to 100%. We'd love to get to 100%, right? Not to be Downer Dan, I do that enough, right? Get to 100%, it's gonna be another 400,000, right? But there are budgetary implications. All right, deaf and hard of hearing, market adjustment. Try to find a signer. We have students who have needs. It's a very competitive work environment. Same with SLPs, same with some of our other specialists. And quite frankly, same with trying to find a 3rd grade teacher. You've all heard it before. 12 years ago, we'd have 300 applications. Maybe we get a dozen and a half. In a district this size, compared to our surrounding districts, is about 5 districts, right? So if we take Clinton and Turner and Evansville and Edgerton and Parkview and maybe Milton, we're 1, right? So even internally, our elementary principals, our secondary principals are competing for talent in a very limited marketplace already. All right, nursing, okay, I can tell you, that's an area of interest, and I'll leave it at that. Other market adjustments, and again, we have CPIU. What are we going to do there? What are some of our strategies? And I asked that question, not like, I don't know what we're going to do, right? But I asked that question in terms of we really need to be strategic and tactical. Because again, the overarching theme, we go back to our promises, right? Attract and retain talent. Okay, other considerations, well, curriculum. You just did, within the last 2 years, a math curriculum adoption, right? And I believe Allison and her team have shared with you the dividends that curriculum has paid. All right, so her team, Allison and her team, right, are working on what's a really robust 6-year curriculum adoption cycle, right? Because we need to make advancements, right, in, what's a fancy word for reading? Language arts, thank you, right? In science, in some of the other areas, right? We want to provide our children a robust curriculum. And that's not just a textbook. It's an online resource. It's manipulatives. It's all of that stuff, right? Technology and 4K contracts. You say 4K contracts. Okay, so, sorry, you've been on the board the least amount of time, Commissioner Millard, but if I look to Commissioner Domenhausen and Commissioner Ardrey, right, we have 4K partners in the community, okay? We pay them $2,000 a year, okay, for a student, over a 5-year payment process, 5 payment cycle throughout the year. It's $2,000. It's been $2,000 since the inception. Okay, no raises. All right, now it's interesting, right? I'm kind of curious as to who crafted that original agreement, quite frankly, right? But that's water over the bridge. So what are we going to do, right? Because Angela Lynch, who's our 4K coordinator, right, is working with our 4K partners who too are struggling, right, to find qualified candidates, right, to fill those positions with our community-based partners. The stronger those programs are, a little bit of a lighter lift our kindergartner teachers have, right? That's the concept of 4K. So how can we help? If we look at our revenue growth over time since 2013, it's gone up about 7.4% since 2013. For our 4K partners, it's been 0. So this is the challenge Angela poses to Tammy, myself, and Matt. What can you do? Can you help us out? Right, so again, a lot of like, oh my gosh, what are we going to do? Right, so I'm thankful that we have a good admin team. Right, I'm thankful we have a really strong group within BSG to assist in the decision making by taking a look at our data, cleaning up our chart of accounts, right? Essentially understanding where we're at, doing more analysis and less payment of bills. All right, so in summary, right, this is the happy news hour, right? You should have seen all the directors, right? It's a good thing we don't allow alcohol on campus, right? Because we probably would have broke into that. All right, so 2-year summary, we're in year 2 of state biannual budget, all right? The budget process. The budget is more than a document. As Commissioner Ardrey alluded to, it's really a process. It's a living, breathing item, and it's not just the printed pages of the budget. How are we managing the budget? How are we looking this year? How are we looking into the future? How are we preparing for success and positioning ourselves as a district, right? Membership update you got, received, excuse me, that's poor grammar. Okay, you received the membership update. What's coming next September? Budgeting what we had this last year. I could go less, all right? Then that's gonna pose challenges to the L&I team, such as Chris and Allison and staffing. Let's shop another 130 FTEs. We'll get a declining enrollment exemption. That's not too bad, but that disappears. And we're budgeting for even a worse case scenario. So it's stable. That's going to be the recommendation from my perspective on the assumptions. Talked a little bit about projected revenues and expenses. We got all the ESSER money. Okay, so I have a really good peer group. Small districts, large districts. All right, to Tammy's point, all right, do you want to create a fiscal cliff or you really want to try to work within your means? All right, and use it for the additional items because we have lost over ground, right? Is it the after school programming, right? Is it weekend? Is it other things that we can do to supplement, not to supplant? All right, I have a friend of mine, business manager. The difference is where are you at and what's your horizon? Maybe, but we're not in this case. But this is what you'll hear, right? You guys read the paper. This is why we get questions. Well, I heard so-and-so is doing this. Sure, so-and-so may supplant because in 22 they're going to an operating referendum for 23, 24. So they're going to bridge. We can't bridge. You know, so this is where we're similar, but we're very different in terms of our starting point and where we're at in the calendar for a referendum. All right, and then considerations. We kind of threw that list out there, right? And it's not exhaustive. I'm sure there's more. All right, but these are the things administratively, the director's team, Superintendent Pufall, the BSG and others is, okay, how are we working through this? Can we work through this? What are going to be the staffing recommendations? Will there be a reduction recommendation, right? Because this is the environment in which we're living, right? And this is why I will continue to probably say, okay, from a committee perspective, right, as representatives of finance, again, we need to apostolize, we need to share, because we cannot in one group be making budget considerations. Again, it goes before the board, right? But people get excited about stuff, right? And then we appear to pull the carpet out. Versus this is our reality and how are we making decisions moving forward within our reality. We do pay our electric bills that much, right? So yes, so that's it. So, you know, I'll go back, right? And so 1993, 94, the board at that time probably thought the sky was falling. Okay, 2010, the sky is falling. All right, it is getting more and more difficult to perform the services that we're committed to doing. I can't say, well, it all worked out. right? We continue to get challenges, and throughout those challenges, the board and administration have had to make difficult decisions. We'll continue to have that scenario play out as well.
Thank you for your report.
Yes, that's very gracious. Yeah, and I'm chuckling not because of the content, right? So thank you.
So as we move toward, like, I would say, not we, as administration moves toward the budget assumptions that gets presented to us. So if I understand this correctly, less membership equals less revenue.
Correct.
So, but with less membership equals some level of less expenditures. Some level. And that has to tie out to what does that mean. So as we go back to what slide number it was. The membership by category over time, well, not over time, but is how we arrived at this. So in my mind, as I sit here and haven't sat here maybe too long, but at some point maybe this isn't the right slide. No, it's probably it. As we look at and that's probably the better one, as we look at what has our enrollment, membership, and staffing by category has looked like over time. Because ultimately, well, I guess how I view this is if we have 3.4 million of a deficit, 80% of it's people, then that's 2.8 or roughly 2.8 million of people costs that got to come out of whatever we're doing. So my mind says, how has our staffing by category been over this period of time? Whether it's administration, certified, classified, not breaking them down into individual positions, just as a collective groups. And when we start looking at tough decisions and things that really we have to do, I think we have to be at somewhat of a granular level. So as I'm thinking about this, so if we had 0 enrollment, we would have 0 revenue and 0 expenses. So the first child shows up, doesn't matter where they're at, just one child, then all that's necessary for that one child, regardless of where they're at. I mean, because there is enough baked in responses for that one child. Then if you have enough that you need to go outside of a particular building, then there's even more that gets baked in. And by no means do I want to go through an exercise that I went through roughly 10 years or so ago, because Tammy's not there to help me anymore. Well, not at the same level. So we can say that it isn't, we wouldn't necessarily be at a spot of closing any building, but if we look at getting extreme, we can change boundaries. I mean, so yeah, we can do that, but what we're saying is then we're doing something else with that building because we can't keep it viable for enrollment coming back because we went through that exercise and it cost too much to do that. So the main thing it is, and I guess as on my monologue here, the biggest piece is as we look at supporting all that we do to make sure that we're doing as much as we can to maximize the enrollment and membership numbers and not just following birth rates. Because to me that we're not doing anything. At this point, well, many of us won't need to be here if that's the case, particularly as we move out 5 or so years. Then that would be, we see if the decline continues, what that looks like. And at that point, we are closing a building. At some point, we have to. So it becomes important that we are focusing on the educational values and becoming, and this is what I've heard from, and we heard as a board from our search firms, is that Janesville is a destination district for superintendents. Well, it has to be a destination district, period. Where enrollment and membership comes, and then the talent will come with it. But we got to do things different. So, as much as, this is what I getting to my main point here, as we think about doing things different, the sense of what Dan has brought in to the business service office with doing things different, transforming. And then we as a board really need to look at our decision making and how do we transform that and help move us in a solidly different path so that we can be sustainable over the years and Janesville won't get I'll just stop there. So the question I did have, open enrollment, the flow of dollars by students. I know it changes or can change daily. Does the flow of dollars change daily, monthly, or is it sort of an annual true up amongst whatever districts have exchanged students?
So off the top of, sorry, right? May I? Okay. So I want to say off the top of my head, right, and I have to go back, is, right, we always will compare, right, because we're taking a look at our fiscal year budget, right, which is kind of, we rely upon that September count, right, to drive that budget number, right, which is, even though we're 2.5 months into the fiscal year, right, that's a consideration as we're locking in on that, right, and then where are we at year end when we get DPI reconciliation, right, and so I want to say we were about $60,000 to the worse, right, maybe it was to the better, sorry, it was a number of months ago relative to OE, right, so it is very fluid. It's not as though we're budgeting, 1.8 million in revenue, 1.3 million in expenses for a net gain of $500,000, and then oops, Dan's numbers were wrong and it's $250,000, right? So we lost $250,000. So there's not that much disparity, but to your point is there is fluidity, and we're still well below, essentially $100,000 in terms of that dynamic value.
Okay, and then one other item, and this is maybe more so of note, fiscal responsibility in our case has not been rewarded. So I think it's important for us as we think about telling the district story we did a little bit for the referendum, but I think it's continuing and it becomes more important to say the starting point that all of the districts were in, fiscal responsibility was not rewarded over time. So that becomes important as it looks like the mechanisms that we have to provide money is only through referendum. So I just wanted to point that out. And as Dan shows by other districts and what they're able to do, not saying they were at any point irresponsible, but their starting point was in a better spot when we look back in hindsight. I think I had one more question. My 80% of the 3.4, that was my comment, so I took care of that. Any other thoughts or things that have come up?
Take off on what you've been saying right along, Greg, and so is Dan. We have some future responsibility as a district, and that doesn't just mean this committee. We can be leadership in it, but it means the whole board and the whole community accepting it. Now is now is the time to be looking forward to, moving forward towards what's going to be a reality. Unless something dramatic changes, whether in Madison or something else, and I think most districts are in the same boat. I know, having been on the state school board, I listened to a lot of districts and the things that were necessary. And yet today, as I go to regional meetings, they still see the same thing. It isn't going away. The one thing that, even if you can do more referendums, the minute you get into that and you get into it in a year or two, and all of a sudden, guess what? You're right back into it. But we're going to have to look at this very carefully as we go forward, and we're going to have to do it being proactive. Although some people may not like it, we're going to have to do it. So I commend Greg for keeping us on top of this. I commend you, Dan, for keeping us aware of this. And I commend your people. Tomorrow is not too soon to start on this and that, because it's going to be a nightmare if we don't. So thank you for bringing it up, reminding us and everything else, and thank you, Greg, for continuing to highlight it. We need to keep it highlighted. So thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, as our roller coaster continues, let's go uphill now. With the presentation of the anatomy of a tax bill, that is just a bill, it's only a bill.
Hey, Commissioner Ardrey, I believe you just dated yourself, right? So conjunction, function, what's your junk? Yeah.
Except for maybe.
Okay, so as everyone knows, right, including myself, right, any property owner in the state of Wisconsin in December begins to receive their tax bill, right? So what is that, right? And so as a former board member for 15 years, you know, I'm not going to say I got a call every year, but occasionally I got a call, right? So I'm very sympathetic to the role that you serve in this community. So spending a little time talking about a tax bill. Right, and you may see Wendy duck out, right? So Wendy has another board meeting to attend to, but I know she's been waiting with bated breath for this particular presentation, right? So she only sees me, right, in my role during the audit season, and now she's seeing a different light of Dan. All right, so a couple of objectives. So available resources and understanding property taxes, right? So we want to be very transparent with what those resources are. The definitions of assessed versus equalized, what the heck is a PI 401? What's a sample tax bill? Tell me a little bit more about the levy credit and mill rates. Okay, so two great resources. The first one being Department of Revenue, DOR, right? They have a guide for property tax owners, right? It's about 30 pages long and includes a glossary. It's a really great resource on the DOR, Department of Revenue website. Right, again, sometimes, right, we talk about being transparent, right, versus looking to understanding. Right, so right now this is us being transparent in terms of sharing a resource. All right, understanding is really kind of incumbent upon the reader, right? And incumbent upon the work that the BSG does, the Business Services Group, whether it's Dave Leader in facilities, Tammy, Matt, Kathy, right, is how are we trying to promote some understanding? We're not here to make you 08s licensed school business managers, right? But we're here to essentially try to demystify, right, the rather non-linear concept of school finance. Wisconsin Policy Forum. This is a Wisconsin Taxpayers Alliance article, right? Focusing on, again, understanding property taxes, right? It's very unique. $150,000 parcel in A township will pay different taxes than a $150,000 parcel in B township, right? And well, why is that? And it really gets to be the composition, right, of the assessed value and equalized value of that particular municipality. WisTax is a great resource. Again, WisTax merge. It's now the Wisconsin Policy Forum, an exceptional resource. Okay, assessed value. All right, what is assessed value? And I'm not going to read this. It's a lot of words, but you'll have it. Essentially, it determines the portion of property tax bill that is due from that property. Right? That's kind of it, right? Assessed is different. And let me pause. I probably should have opened with this. the district levies on equalized value. Municipalities process tax bills, based upon assessed value. Equalized value, right? The estimated value of taxable and real personal property. All right. Equalized value represents the market value of property. Right. And this is why I love the DOR, right? In terms of Wisconsin, or in terms of the tax guide, because this is right out of their book. Right. So it's not Dan's interpretation. Maybe a little bit of wordsmithing, but it's pretty legit. Right. So equalized value. And those are just two important concepts as we work through this, right? And as I'm sure you share with individuals. And again, just kind of comparing the two. I tried to change font. It didn't really pan out as much as I'd like. All right. So the DOR equalized valuation, the tax apportionment. So where are we? Who comes up with this number? Well, it's the Department of Revenue, right? August 15th, municipal values are released. All right. Districts are getting them in October. So we have somewhat of a projection, right? So kind of summertime, we begin to know about the property value increase or decrease of the district. It's just not official. But it does help us to begin to, what does that budget look like? What does the mill rate in the future look like? Right, so for us, I'll do the Tammy thing here and carry it with me. All right, our TID out, right? So we have tax incremental districts and we have TID out, right? So we take a look at the TID out value. And for us, it's about 5.3, almost 5.4 million, right? It was just under an 8% increase this last fiscal year. So that's great. So keep that in mind in terms of property increases. All right. And then what we do is what portion of that municipality is within the School District of Janesville. Right. So obviously, right, 90% is in the city of Janesville. Okay. 1% is in the town of La Prairie. Even less than 1%, right, is the town of Harmony. Right, so we're taking our equalized value across the municipalities that serve our school district or that our school district serves, and we're distributing it. This is a DOR, Department of Revenue calculation. We take that property value, all right, we take essentially the revenue limit worksheet, we deduct state aid, we see what we're allowed to tax within Fund 10 general operating. We also have our debt service obligations. We have a community service obligation. We tally that up. We divide that levy by our total property value, and that's what determines our mill rate. Revenue limit worksheet. Okay, now we go back to the tax apportionment. There's a worksheet. How are we assigning, all right, the taxes across the municipalities? So if we take 46 million, the city of Janesville is getting 90+% of that. The town of Harmony is getting less than 1%. This is what's called the PI 401. It's a DPI form. So we take in all of our levies. So you'll see the levies on the left-hand side, right? It's related to general fund, capital expansion fund, non-referendum approved Fund 38 debt, right? That's all within the revenue limit across that middle line there going across the bottom, or middle, of the PI 401. Then we have our debt service, right? So our property tax chargebacks and our referendum approved debt and our community service fund, because those three things are outside of the revenue limit authority. And then that's where we get to the 46 million. About 3.6 million more than it was last year. And you're gonna go, 3.6 million more than last year? I thought we passed a $3.5 million operating referendum. I thought we passed a debt referendum, right? And that's almost 5 million. That's 8 million, 8.5 million. How can it be, right? Well, again, we're managing our levy. It's a revenue limit worksheet, right? These are all the calcs that go into, right? So we're not taxing 8.5 million more than we did the prior year. We're taxing 3.6 million more. And when we talk about defeasing debt, right, this is why we defease debt, is to minimize that impact when we look at future operating referendums and future debt referendums. here what we're doing is really taking a look at that lime highlighted area. Again, the percent within the district, all right, that municipality lies, and the taxation per district. Excuse me, per municipality. I misspoke there. Okay, so then, all right, our board clerk, right, Michelle will go ahead. Denise notarizes, and this is the form we send to each municipality. So it's confirming the DOR calculations certified by the board and signed off by the board clerk, Michelle Hayworth, notarized by Denise Jensen, and submitted to each municipality. This is the tax bill on equalized property taxes that goes, as an example, to the city of Janesville. All right, so the city of Janesville then has their calculation, and I can't speak to those, right? We had Sam in, right, probably shortly after my time here, arriving to the district after the revaluation, kind of talking about the process. There's a process, I'm not going to speak to it. We have really good people at the city of Janesville who do diligent work, all right? And then the tax bill comes out. All right, so let me take you through the tax bill. All right, section A there is essentially the assessed value. All right, then the fair market value. And these begin to be the calculations that the DOR uses, right, in terms of sales, not necessarily market value, but sales and assessed value to come up with equalized value. It's not a district calculation. All right, but we have A and B on your tax bill. C is your levy credit. All right, levy credit is a rather interesting topic, right? So when the state throws more money into the levy credit, all right, it's property tax relief, but it's earmarked as education dollars because it's targeted towards providing educational tax relief. Right. So what happens is, as a board in November, you certify the levy, and you have a mill rate associated with that. Right, and that's what is on the newspaper. Then shortly after December 1st, the DOR provides the municipalities the calculations for determining each parcel's levy credit. All right, we're going to talk a little bit about levy credit and mill rates a few slides up the path. And we can see this particular property taxpayer paid in 2020 $1,323 in taxes towards the School District of Janesville, and about another $156 additional the next year, for a total of $1,456. That's a 12% increase. Okay. We passed an operating referendum. We passed a debt referendum. 12% is large. It's $150, $56. Not saying that's not significant for our families, right? I'll be very transparent, but there's a cost of doing business. There's a cost of passing an operating referendum. There's a cost of passing a debt referendum. Then we get to E. Because we have non-recurring referendum, which is debt, and a non-recurring operational referendum, you'll see the calculations related to this year's increase, right, and its impact on this particular parcel. We have to provide that transparency. If we passed a recurring referendum, it would not have to be on the tax bill. So if you have a friend in Clinton, they're not seeing that same data point as we here are in Janesville. So a little bit of a breakdown. Got the levy credit. Keep the levy credit tucked away. All right, so I ran some taxes over time of a particular parcel holder. Right, we see the assessed value in column A with the year. Then we go to column B, which is the estimated fair market value. And then we can see, based upon essentially the assessed value, what the taxes are in 2013 for that parcel. If we take that parcel and we fast forward to the 2021 district levy, right, the tax bills that came out in December of 2021, okay, we could see the assessed value of that parcel increased 30% over time. We can also see the fair market value increased 37% over time, 57% over time, right? And we can see that taxes over that 9-year period went up 38%. All right, the next column, D, is the levy credit. Okay, so the levy credit are reducing, if we look to 2013, that bottom yellow highlighted line, 165.6, 194 in fair market, 1,456 in taxes. That's the tax bill we saw earlier in the slide deck, right? There's a $246 levy credit. Well, how's that levy credit work? All right, as we continue to go from left to right, all right, we will see the growth. The growth is actually, if you will, the 12% that we saw in the prior year property taxes. Sorry, my columns aren't like necessarily perfect, right? But that's where we're at. But if we go to C plus D, if you were to add column C values to column D values, right, essentially taxes were reduced from $1,703 for that particular property holder to $1,456 as a result of that property levy credit. Excuse me, that levy credit. So levy credits are helping property tax payers. In December, after the board adopts its levy in November. All right, it's a lot of detail and I appreciate your patience. I know we're getting long in the night here. All right, what's the mill rate? If we look at column G, how did we calculate the mill rate? Right, so I was just curious, right? And so we look at G as a mill rate. What would the mill rate on the assessed value be? Essentially $8.80 if we continue down that bottom line. Okay, what was our equalized value mill rate? $8.75. This is why people are not always going to get to the exact penny. And you said the mill rate was going to be $8.75. Well, for this particular property holder in the city of Janesville, you could calculate it as $8.80, and that's taking their assessed value divided by their levy after the lottery credit. The far right side of this kind of lime green circles, right, is I'm looking at what's the state average. The state average isn't available quite yet for the 2021. What's the state average mill rate? What's the district mill rate? And what's the difference? And so back in 2013, it was $10.06. Right now, with the passage of a debt issuance for secure pathways and an operational referendum, we're at $8.75. Right, mill rates are interesting, but mill rates are not indicative of tax burden. Right, because all mill rate is a calculation, right, of our property value, of our levy divided by our property value. Levy is indicative, and that's probably a topic for another day in terms of what is our levy per member and how do we compare. All right, so taxes went up 12%. Taxes for this particular property holder went up nearly 40% over a 9-year period. The property value went up nearly 60% over the same period of time. Now, someone's gonna say, so you're telling me I gotta sell my house? No, not telling you gotta sell your house, right? I'm trying to, and I may be wrong here, so I'm interested, maybe not at this meeting, but maybe in a vigorous debate sometime in terms of, yes, property taxes are going up, your property values are going up, right? So this too sometimes, right, we talked about this, I know Commissioner Dahmenhauser 2 years ago attended the school finance puzzle, right? And so we spent a great deal of time at the WASB convention. It's about a 3-hour session talking about school finance. A portion of this really relates to tax bills and levies, right? It's a very interesting topic. Really, the intent here was to try to demystify it a bit, right? And give me some context. My taxes went up 12% for this particular property holder. They did. They went up about $150. You know, well, Dan, sure, that's nothing to you. You're the CFO. So I'd say, you know, it's $150, right? I don't get to be the CFO by not stopping and picking up a penny every once in a while, right? So trust me, I understand the value of that, all right? But it also gets back into what's the brand value proposition the community has with the district. If there's continued value in the brand, there will be continued investment. Well, how do we continue to have a brand that's valued? It's our investment in our staff. It's an investment in teaching and learning, right? And what we do within the classroom. If we're doing really good stuff in the classroom, just like if you find a really good pair of shoes you're going to continue to buy those because you value the brand. and not that classroom or shoes, but if there's value in what we produce, what our students produce, right, the instruction that goes on in the classroom, right, there'll be continued investment in the district. So just trying to break down in summary, what are we doing here? Available resources to understanding property taxes, right? So if we want to, if you get hit at the grocery store, at church, at Quick Trip, right? Well, I don't understand property taxes. You know, DR has great information. Go to the DOR. All right, Wisconsin Taxpayers Alliance. There's 2 articles on the district's website and business services that talk about property taxes. Okay. Definition of assessed versus equalized. We levy on equalized value. It's a DOR calculation of sales and assessed value. I don't have the algorithm for that, but that's what they do, so I trust them. Right? The PI 401 is kind of part of the process. We're apportioning based upon the percentage of the municipalities within our district. Right? We're dividing it out. Sample tax bill, right? Levy credit, we talked a little bit about. Levy credit reduces, that comes in December, right? It's reducing, right? When I was in Clinton, right, it actually reduced the levy credit, the mill rate even more. Here it seems to be kind of tight. I'm not sure why that is. I'll have to dig into that a little bit further. Mill rates, and then any questions. I know it's been a long night, afternoon. Okay.
Go ahead.
You have any?
I'm good, thank you.
So, is there any relationship at all to the number of students who come through the door to what our tax bill would be?
Yes.
What is the relationship?
So the more students you have coming are members. They reside within the School District of Janesville. So if that number goes up, your revenue limit authority goes up. When that number goes down, our revenue limit authority goes down.
I don't know if that was going up the hill. Maybe that was just a curve at the end of the roller coaster. All right, future committee meeting items.
The only item I have is that I mentioned earlier, and that's a continuing item, and like I say, sooner the better, but I defer because I understand the work that our people have, so,
Yep.
thank you.
Jim?
No, I'm good.
Okay. I guess the only thing that I would have for, we will set our next meeting sometime in the future here, but for you two, your availability,
Mine's in trouble on Wednesday and Thursday and Saturday and Sunday.
okay,
The other Monday, Tuesday, and Friday are generally pretty good.
okay, for building walkthrough. That's what I was thinking. Okay, and, okay,
You figure out when you can do it and.
All right.
do it.
I'll contact you guys and
Okay.
we can work out
Sounds
something.
fair.
Oh, Dan? Looked like you had something.
So I know there's some data that we're gathering related to ESSER in terms of potential possibilities for ESSER funding, both on the instructional side as potentially the facility side. We also maybe have a consideration for some of our planning into the future relative to maybe a different version of a population study as well as kind of capacity and utilization. Does the committee wish to entertain, for lack of a better phrase, a sooner than later meeting?
So I'm hesitating because I know that we're gonna have some extra meetings anyway. So we can talk through that
Sure.
once I better understand our schedule and what we will have extra coming up. So,
Very good, thank you.
As we move on, and the thing, there's some federal funds available. Are they additional to what we see so far? And that things that we can use to fill part of our gaps with maintenance and additional things? You know what I mean with the, well, not the Build Back Better, but the previous things towards, school needs? Is there money there? And I mean, what I mean is for basically physical items.
So you're talking about ESSER funding?
Is that all ESSER that was passed before?
At this point, ESSER funding is what we're utilizing.
Okay, because I know they sent them to the states and then we had to get grants from the state. So is that part of the ESSER?
Correct, correct.
Okay. Thank you for the clarification. That was just, get that out of my mind then.
Well, there are bills right now with
I don't know what's been released, what hasn't been released from the state. There's a lot of money in Washington yet that hasn't been released.
that hasn't been, that's still in the process of bills.
Hopefully some more money can come up and we start cleaning up our air in our schools.
Well, that's what Greg alluded to earlier was about, is it all gonna go to addressing those funds? It's highly unlikely that whole 16 million is gonna go to addressing those. There's very many portions, which is why we have the air quality piece in our.
I think it's important. I had to drop out of a couple of schools. In my opinion,
Yep, yeah. So we currently are in the middle of the air quality study right now, and we use SR2 money to do, and it is likely that some of the SR2.
Sure, we could give.
One was that.
Right, but how do you?
I don't know.
How do you do it?
Yeah. And I try not to get just think other than Greg's comments. But it just kind of gets this, I think, along. I worry about long-term health and learning.
I messaged Patrick, I said, I don't know what's going on with this stuff.